What if I told you that half of a Victorian mansion was designed so that you would never know about it? We are accustomed to admiring the majestic facades, marble fireplaces, and spacious ballrooms of that era, considering them the pinnacle of architectural thought. However, behind this glittering scene lay a vast, complex, and completely invisible backstage area, where its own cruel laws prevailed. The architects of the time created not just houses, but complex machines for segregating people, where walls served not to protect from the weather, but to divide social classes. It was a world of secret corridors, hidden staircases, and windowless rooms, where real life was bustling, providing luxury for the owners. Guests visiting these mansions saw only a flawless spectacle, unaware of the existence of a complex system hidden literally behind the wallpaper. Watch the video to the end to find out how architecture made people invisible in their own homes and what price had to be paid for the perfect order of Victorian life. What if I told you that everything you believed about the unity of the family hearth was a lie? In every wealthy Victorian home, there was one specific door that was not just a partition, but a real state border. It separated the front part of the house, filled with light and art, from the servants' quarters, immersed in eternal semi-darkness and labor. This door was always covered with thick green cloth, a material chosen not by chance, but because of its soundproofing properties. Its purpose was to keep sounds, smells, and even the very presence of the servants from reaching the master's part of the mansion. The green baize door was an absolute barrier, which most of the inhabitants of the servants' wing were strictly forbidden to cross without permission. Behind it, the carpets ended, and bare wooden floors or cold stone tiles began, which were easier to wash. Behind it, the stucco moldings and expensive wallpaper disappeared, giving way to simple plaster and practical dark-colored paint. The air here was different. Instead of the scent of flowers and wax, it smelled of boiled cabbage, coal, and dampness. It was a portal between the world of idleness and the world of exhausting, endless labor. Architects designed this boundary with maniacal precision, calculating the angles of view so that even when the door was opened, guests would not see anything unnecessary. The corridors behind the door were often curved so that the gaze could not penetrate the depths of the service rooms. It was an architecture of disappearance, designed to erase any hint that dinner was being prepared and laundry was being done by living people. The owners of the house could live their entire lives without ever stepping inside the green door. For the servant, however, this passageway was a daily reminder of his place in the strict hierarchy. Interestingly, this door also served as a social filter, blocking any personal problems of the staff from the ears of the owners. The laughter, crying, or conversations of the servants had to die on the threshold of this fabric-covered barrier. While the front part of the house was dominated by a cult of family and comfort, behind the door there was strict barracks discipline. Even the architectural proportions changed. The ceilings became lower and the windows narrower, emphasizing the secondary nature of this space. The existence of such a boundary created a surprising psychological effect of a double life within one building. The servants knew everything about their masters, heard their conversations, and saw their weaknesses, while remaining silent shadows. The masters, on the other hand, preferred to think that food appeared on the table by itself, and dust disappeared at the wave of a magic wand. The green door maintained this illusion, allowing two worlds to coexist without touching. It is curious that the door handle mechanism on the servant's side was often made tighter or more inconvenient than on the master's side. It was another small detail that dictated the rules of behavior and reminded everyone who was in charge. The fittings themselves, polished brass on one side, could be simple iron on the other. In this way, the architecture spoke to people in the language of tactile sensations, showing them their place. In large country estates, this concept of separation was taken to the extreme, turning the servants' quarters into separate outbuildings. Sometimes they were connected to the main house by only one long corridor, which could be easily blocked off. This allowed the owners to feel completely secluded, despite the presence of dozens of people under one roof. The illusion of solitude and privacy was the most expensive commodity sold by architects of that era. The green door became a symbol of Victorian hypocrisy, hiding the unsightly underside of a beautiful life. It taught people to be invisible, silent, and inconspicuous, turning a person into a function. This interior detail, which now seems insignificant, determined the fates and shaped the characters of generations. It would be very interesting to hear your opinion on such strict segregation within the home. What do you think about how architecture can dictate social behavior? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how people actually moved within these walls? If the grand staircase was the heart of the house, demonstrating the wealth and taste of the owner, then the service staircases were its hidden arteries. They were designed with a single purpose in mind: to allow staff to move quickly while remaining completely invisible. These staircases were hidden within the thickness of the walls, behind inconspicuous panels, and were dark, narrow shafts. Unlike the gentle, wide steps of the main entrance, the service staircases were steep and dangerous. Architects saved space by making the steps high and narrow, turning every descent into a risky venture. Imagine a maid carrying a tray with breakfast or a heavy bucket of coal up such a spiral structure. One wrong move could lead to a fall, and such accidents were frighteningly common. These staircases ran through the house from the basement to the attic, connecting all the floors with an invisible thread. They allowed a servant to appear in the master's bedroom, tidy up the room, and disappear before he returned. It was a system of secret passages that made service instantaneous but impersonal. The walls here were finished with nothing but rough plaster, which often scraped the skin off your hands when you touched it. There was virtually no ventilation on these black staircases. In the air there was always stuffy and heavy. The smells from the kitchen rising from below mixed with the smell of dampness and dust, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Lighting was minimal. A dim gas lamp on the landing or no light at all forced people to move by touch. It was an area where the sun never shone and where no gentleman ever set foot. Interestingly, these staircases often did not have railings in the usual sense, being replaced only by a stretched rope or a rough handrail. Saving on staff safety was considered the norm, since no one was supposed to see these spaces. For the architect, it was just a functional shaft, a technical channel for the movement of labor. There was a strict rule. If two servants met on such a staircase, the junior one had to press himself against the wall, letting the senior one pass. But the worst sin was to encounter the master on the stairs, who, on a whim, decided to use the back entrance. In this case, the servant was obliged to turn his face to the wall and become literally invisible, freezing until the master passed by. It was along these stairs that everything necessary for a comfortable life was delivered to the rooms. Hot water, clean clothes, polished shoes, and along them, everything dirty and unsightly was carried out. Ashes from fireplaces, dirty laundry, chamber pots. The vertical labyrinth functioned as the digestive system of the house, hiding the processes of metabolism from the eyes of the inhabitants. The soundproofing of these shafts was also an important engineering solution. The sound of footsteps and the clanging of buckets were not to penetrate the living quarters. The doors leading from the black staircase to the corridors were often disguised as part of the wall or covered with curtains. To a guest sitting in the living room, it seemed as if the servant materialized out of thin air. This staircase system was the physical embodiment of the social divide between the inhabitants of the same house. Some flew up the wide flights, holding on to the polished mahogany banisters. Others scrambled up steep steps, rubbing their hands against rough walls in perpetual darkness. In the next chapter, you will learn a secret that was hidden not within the walls, but deep underground, and for which people pay thousands to see today. What I am about to show you exceeded all my expectations when studying the plans of old estates. In some particularly grand estates, the desire to hide the servants reached absurd proportions and literally went underground. The owners did not want to see gardeners, grooms, or food suppliers moving around their perfectly manicured lawns. The solution was to build an extensive network of underground tunnels that crisscrossed the estate like a subway system. These tunnels connected the main house to the kitchens, which were often located in a separate building due to the risk of fire and odors. Imagine the journey a dish had to take. It was prepared in a remote building, and then the servants ran with it along a long underground corridor. To keep the food warm, these corridors were sometimes equipped with special rail trolleys or heating systems. It was an incredible logistical operation taking place under the feet of the strolling aristocrats. One of the most striking examples of such architectural paranoia was the Welbeck Abbey estate, owned by the eccentric Duke of Portland. He built a whole network of underground halls, libraries, and passageways to move around his estate without encountering a single living soul. But even in less extravagant homes, tunnels for coal and household needs were the norm. The tunnels had another important purpose. They allowed huge amounts of coal to be brought into the house without dirtying the front entrances. Black dust, an inevitable companion of Victorian comfort, remained downstairs in stone bags in the basements. Ice for ice boxes, carcasses of meat, and boxes of wine also entered the house through these same underground entrances. The walls of these corridors were usually lined with white glazed bricks to enhance the dim light from the few lamps. This created a strange, sterile, and cold appearance, more reminiscent of a hospital or morgue than a residential building. The sound of footsteps in such tunnels echoed over long distances, creating an eerie atmosphere. For servants, these passages were a lifesaver in rainy weather, but they also turned their work into a mole's life. A person could spend the whole day moving between the stables, the kitchen, and the basement without ever seeing daylight. It was complete isolation from the outside world, even from the weather and the changing times of day. The engineering complexity of such structures is striking. Waterproofing, ventilation, and protection against collapse had to be provided. This required enormous costs, comparable to the construction of the house itself. But the Victorian elite were willing to pay any price for the visual purity of their landscape. Sometimes these tunnels were used to allow staff to reach the local church or village unnoticed. The owners did not want the sight of a crowd of servants spoiling the pastoral view from the living room window. Aesthetics were placed above human dignity and convenience. Today, these underground labyrinths attract tourists with their mystery and dark romance. They remain silent witnesses to how far people were willing to go in their desire to shut themselves off from the reality of labor. It was a world created to be buried alive. Don't forget to like this if you are also amazed by the scale of this hidden infrastructure. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the technology of the past? Hidden within the walls of many Victorian mansions was a mechanism that revolutionized everyday life: the dumbwaiter, or silent waiter. It was a small freight elevator designed to lift food from the kitchen to the dining room and bring dirty dishes back down. It allowed meals to be served hot without forcing servants to run up and down stairs with heavy trays. The design consisted of a wooden box moving inside a shaft on a system of ropes and counterweights. It was operated manually. The strong arms of a kitchen worker in the basement pulled the ropes, lifting the load upstairs. This required considerable physical strength, especially when it came to large dinner parties with dozens of courses. The silent waiter shaft was another channel of communication between worlds, but a strictly functional one. Through it, the chef's commands and the clatter of dishes could be heard. But for the guests in the dining room, this hole in the wall was hidden behind an elegant panel. The doors opened only at the right moment, revealing the miracle of cooking, and immediately slammed shut. However, this convenience had a dark side. These shafts often became a source of drafts and fire hazards. A fire that broke out in the kitchen could instantly spread through the wooden box to the upper floors. In addition, the ropes had a tendency to fray, and a heavy box falling could injure anyone below. There were legends and scary stories about people hiding or getting stuck in these shafts. In some houses, the size of the elevator allowed a child or a petite maid to fit inside, which was sometimes used for jokes or secret meetings. But more often than not, it was just a dark, food-smelling space full of grease and dust. Maintaining the mechanism required regular lubrication and inspection, but like everything hidden, it was often ignored until it broke down. The creak of the silent waiter was one of the few backstage sounds that could disturb the silence of the formal dining room. Therefore, the guides were covered with felt or rubber for silent operation. The use of this device made it possible to reduce the number of servants present in the dining room during intimate dinners. The host could serve themselves by taking dishes out of the elevator, which created the illusion of complete privacy. This was especially valuable for political discussions or romantic encounters. In later periods, mechanized versions appeared, but manual traction remained the most reliable. The silent waiter was the ideal servant. He did not hear conversations, did not gossip, and was invisible. He became the mechanical embodiment of the Victorian ideal of service. Today, we use elevators every day without thinking about the fact that their ancestor was this wooden box with ropes. It was the first attempt to automate everyday life and remove the human factor from the process of serving food. But if the food was lifted silently, how did the owners give orders downstairs? In the next chapter, we will descend into the heart of the house, where it was always hot and noisy. The basement of a typical Victorian mansion was a veritable factory floor, securely hidden beneath the expensive parquet flooring of the master's living rooms. While upstairs reigned an atmosphere of relaxed luxury and silence, downstairs life was bustling with activity. Here, in contrast to the richly decorated upper floors, the space was organized in an extremely rational and utilitarian manner. Every square meter of the basement had a specific purpose. It was the realm of the kitchen, the stuffy scullery, numerous storerooms, and dusty coal pits. Hard physical labor here did not stop for a minute from early morning, often starting at 5 o'clock, and continued until late at night. The interior of these rooms was strikingly different from the master's quarters. The floor here was often covered with cold stone slabs, which were easier to wash but made the servants' feet constantly cold. The walls were usually simply whitewashed with cheap lime. This was done not only to disinfect the damp rooms, but also to reflect at least some of the meager light. The undisputed heart of this dungeon was the kitchen with a huge cast iron stove that took up almost the entire wall. This black monster was heated with coal around the clock, consuming fuel by the bucketful so that hot water or food could be served at any moment. The stove never cooled down completely, even at night. The temperature in this room could reach truly hellish levels, especially on hot summer days. The cook's work turned into a real physical test of endurance, comparable to working in a foundry. The cooks' faces were constantly red from the heat, and their clothes were soaked with sweat. The dishwasher's hands were constantly red, swollen, and corroded by calcined soda and coarse household soap. Thick steam hung in the room like a dense wall, making it difficult to breathe and see the walls. It was the absolute bottom of the domestic hierarchy, a place where the most disenfranchised and youngest girls ended up. The pantries and the buffet room, which were the sole domain of the butler, looked completely different. This is where the family's silver, crystal, and reserves of the best wine, worth a fortune, were kept. The butler was personally responsible for the safety of each item. The butler often slept here, frequently keeping a loaded pistol under his pillow in case of an intrusion by robbers. He guarded the main material values of the house while the owners slept. It was a kind of impregnable fortress inside the basement, where other servants were forbidden to enter. For the butler, it was the only place where a servant could have some semblance of personal space and real authority. Here he kept his accounts, checked the wine stocks, and cleaned the silver with special powders until it shone like a mirror. It was a clean, masculine territory. Separate from the food block was a special room for cleaning shoes and lamps. This room was always permeated with the pungent smell of wax, wicks, and kerosene. Usually a footman or a special servant boy worked here, whose hands were always black from work. Every morning, the footman had to prepare and fill dozens of lamps and candles for the entire huge house. He had to trim the wicks perfectly evenly so that they would not smoke, and polish the glass bulbs until they sparkled. It was painstaking and dirty work that required patience. The slightest speck of soot on the lampshade or the smell of burning in the living room could cause a huge scandal. The owners did not forgive mistakes, and for poor cleaning of the lamps, the servant faced immediate dismissal without recommendation. Therefore, the tension in this room was always high. The lighting in the basement itself was extremely dim and depressing. The windows, if they were even provided for by the architect, opened onto deep stone pits below ground level. Only gray twilight light penetrated through the bars, and only the feet of passers-by on the sidewalk were visible. Mostly the servants had to work under the dim artificial light of gas lamps. The gas burned oxygen, damaged their eyesight with its flickering, and severely depressed their psyche. People lived for years in perpetual twilight, seeing the real bright sun only on rare days off. Ventilation in these labyrinths was primitive or non-existent. Heavy smells of cooking, human sweat, wet wool, and dampness lingered here in a thick, almost tangible fog. The air was stuffy, and newcomers often fainted from the unfamiliarity. It was a real state within a state, hidden from prying eyes. It had its own government in the form of a butler and a housekeeper, its own laws, and its own disenfranchised slaves. It was extremely difficult to escape from this system. It was here, amid the constant noise, heat, dampness, and dim light, that the famous ideal Victorian comfort was forged. The impeccable lifestyle of the English aristocrat was created by the hands of these invisible people. The illusion of ease at the top required backbreaking labor below. Every sip of cool wine and every perfectly clean plate upstairs was paid for with the sweat and health of the people below. The basement was the foundation of the house in every sense of the word, both architectural and social. Without this gloomy mechanism, the glittering world of the drawing rooms simply could not have existed. What happens behind closed doors when the owner pulls the bell cord? We often see in movies how a lady gracefully rings the bell and immediately a maid appears. But behind this simple action lay a complex engineering system that entangled the entire house like the nervous system of a living organism. In the hallway of the service floor hung a huge board with dozens of numbered bells, each corresponding to a specific room. These bells were of different tones and sizes so that an experienced servant could determine where the call was coming from by ear, without even looking at the board. Under each bell was a pendulum that continued to swing for several minutes after the bell was rung. This was done so that a servant who had left on business could see who had called for him when he returned. The system was powered by a complex network of copper wire hidden in the walls, under the floor, and behind the ceiling cornices. Kilometers of this wire stretched throughout the mansion, passing through systems of blocks, levers, and springs. Installing such a system was a real art. The wires had to be free of snags, stretches, or abrasions. When the owner pulled the cord in his bedroom, the force was transmitted through dozens of bends and turns down to the basement. This mechanical marvel required constant adjustment. Changes in humidity and temperature could cause the wire to sag, or, conversely, become too taut. Special craftsmen regularly service this nervous network, lubricating the blocks and tightening the connections. For the servants, the sound of the bell was the law, which could not be ignored under any circumstances. It could ring at any time of the day or night, interrupting sleep or dinner, and demanded an immediate response. The entire life of the staff was subordinated to this metallic ringing, training people like Pavlov's dogs. In later times, mechanical bells were replaced by electric ones with flag indicators. This simplified the system, but made it even more ruthless. Now the button could be pressed with a light touch of the finger. The masters began to ring more often, for the slightest reason, turning the servants into squirrels in a wheel. This system completely depersonalized communication. Instead of calling a person by name or approaching them, it was enough to pull a cord. This increased the distance between classes, turning the servant into a function that could be activated remotely. Interestingly, the wires were often laid in the same channels as the gas pipes, which created an additional hazard. But the convenience of controlling living furniture was more important than safety. The house was turning into a single organism, with the brain in the living room and the arms and legs in the basement. The ringing of bells was a constant background noise in Victorian backstage. It created an atmosphere of eternal anxiety and readiness, not allowing a moment's relaxation. It was a tyranny of sound from which it was impossible to hide. In the next chapter, you will learn how architects solved the problem of dirty entrances and why the butcher never met with guests. A typical Victorian house was a veritable fortress, defended not against armed enemies, but against street dirt and unwanted social mixing. One of the most important and difficult tasks for architects of that time was to competently distribute the flow of people and goods. They had to design buildings so that the worlds of the owners and servants existed in parallel, but never intersected unnecessarily. To ensure this invisible boundary, there was a strict, almost military system of entrances and exits. Each doorway in such a house had its own specific purpose, status, and rules of use. To use the wrong door meant to violate the unshakable social order. The front door, usually massive and decorated with brass, was sacred. It was the face of the house, facing the world. Only the owners themselves and their guests of equal social standing had the right to enter through this solemn portal. A knock on the front door signaled the arrival of someone important, for whom the butler would put on white gloves. For all other beings of lower rank, there was the so-called back entrance. In London houses, it most often led straight to the basement through a deep pit in front of the facade, separated from the sidewalk by a cast-iron grate. This architectural element was called an area and served as the boundary between the street and the house. Numerous merchants, newspaper vendors, postmen, and of course, the servants themselves descended the narrow, steep, and often slippery staircase. It was a literal physical demotion in status. To enter the house, a commoner had to literally go underground, bowing to the foundation of the mansion. A separate huge problem was the delivery of coal, which was the main and only fuel of that era. Coal was incredibly dirty, dusty, and heavy, and tons of it were needed to heat a large mansion. Carrying bags of coal through clean corridors was unthinkable. To load it, the engineers came up with a clever solution. Special round cast-iron hatches were made right in the sidewalk in front of the house. They led through a chute directly to the coal bunkers in the basement. Coal miners simply poured the contents of the bags into these holes from the street without entering the house and keeping the master's quarters sterile and clean. Outside men were strictly forbidden to enter the house beyond a certain buffer zone. This rule was introduced not only to maintain order and cleanliness, it also prevented petty theft of silverware and unnecessary, work-distracting romances between merchants and young cooks. There was even a complex gradation of entrances for the hired workers themselves, depending on their rank. For example, a governess or a gentleman's personal valet were considered a privileged caste. It was not fitting for them to go down into the pit with the laborers, but they were not allowed through the front door either. They could use the side entrance, which was higher in rank than the basement entrance, but significantly lower than the front door. The architecture of the house clearly indicated each person's place on the social ladder. The walls and doors literally regulated which doorway a person had the right to enter so as not to offend public taste. Garbage, kitchen waste, and furnace ashes were taken out exclusively in the early morning while the owners were still asleep. Servants carried heavy buckets out through the most inconspicuous, hidden exits to the backyard. Everything related to dirt or decay had to disappear as if by magic. A special category was made up of night people who cleaned cesspools in old houses that did not yet have sewage systems. They were generally considered untouchables and worked only under the cover of darkness. All the dirty logistics of a large household were completely hidden from the view of gentlemen. The service corridors inside the house were planned with mathematical precision. They were laid out so that a servant with a bucket of coal or a heavy tray could get from point A to point B by the shortest route. At the same time, he was not supposed to appear in the reception rooms or on the main staircase. This was called hidden circulation routes. Often these corridors ran inside walls or behind false panels. If a service corridor inevitably crossed the master's corridor, thick screens or additional doors upholstered with green cloth for sound insulation were always installed. In country estates, this idea of invisibility was taken to the extreme. The farmyard was often masked by thick bushes, hedges, or stone walls. This was done so that laundry drying or carts with manure could not be seen from the windows of the bedrooms or living room. The illusion of an ideal, carefree world was not to be destroyed by crude everyday details. The sight of a working, sweaty person was considered unaesthetic and could spoil the mood of the owners. The landscape outside the window was supposed to resemble a pastoral painting, not a farm. This complex logistics required all staff to have an excellent knowledge of the layout of the house and the habits of the owners. Mistaking a door or bumping into the master in the corridor was not just awkward, it was considered a serious disciplinary offense, indicating poor training of the servant. The space of the house was marked by invisible red lines that could not be crossed at the wrong time. A servant had to become invisible if he suddenly heard the footsteps of the owners. He was obliged to turn away to the wall and freeze until the master passed by. Thus, the Victorian house functioned as a complex living organism with separate circulatory systems. There was an arterial system for the masters, bright, spacious, and clean, and there was a venous system, dark, narrow, and hidden, intended for servants and goods. They provided life to one common body, but were designed never to mix. If the basement was rightly considered a hell of heat, steam, and constant noise, the attic was a realm of icy cold and piercing loneliness. It was here, under the very roof, that the bedrooms of the vast majority of servants, especially female servants, were located. These modest rooms were the complete and striking opposite of the luxurious, warm rooms of the masters below. Architects and designers treated these rooms as an afterthought, using the so-called dead zones under the rafters. The ceilings here were so low that a tall person could not stand up straight. The walls were slanted and oppressive, and the tiny dormer windows let in a minimum of daylight. These small rooms never had fireplaces or stoves, as heating the servants' quarters was considered too expensive and a fire hazard. In winter, the temperature in the bedrooms dropped rapidly, almost matching the outside temperature. The walls froze through and thick steam rose from the mouths of the sleepers. The water in the jugs for washing often turned into a solid block of ice overnight. In the morning, the unfortunate girls had to break this icy crust with heavy objects just to wash their faces before starting their shift. This invigorating start to the day was a daily torture for thousands of maids. In the summer, the situation changed to the exact opposite, but it was no less painful. The black slate roof of the mansion heated up significantly in the sun during the day, turning the attic into a real oven. The heat from the hot roof penetrated inside and remained there until morning. Ventilation in these rooms was extremely poor. The windows often did not open completely, and the air stagnated. By evening, it became unbearably stuffy, stale, and heavy. In such inhuman conditions, people had to try to rest after 14 or even 16 hours of hard physical labor. The interior of the rooms was Spartan and austere. Usually there was a simple iron bed with a hard, lumpy mattress, an old chest of drawers, and perhaps a single rickety chair. There were no soft carpets, paintings on the walls, or pretty knickknacks here. Any decor was considered an unacceptable luxury that only collected dust and distracted from pious thoughts. A person's personal space was reduced to an absolute minimum. Often, several people slept in one cramped room, completely deprived of any privacy and the opportunity to be alone with themselves. This coveted key was kept by the housekeeper under her pillow or on her belt, and it was impossible to get hold of it. The owners kept a closer eye on the morality of their staff than in a monastery. Any hint of romance or scandal could instantly tarnish the reputation of a noble house, which was unacceptable. The way to the attic at the end of the working day led up the longest, narrowest, and steepest staircase in the entire building. For a deadly tired maid who had been carrying coal and water all day, climbing to the 5th floor was the ultimate test of endurance. The steps were often uncarpeted, and footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. The old servants, whose feet were unbearably sore and swollen by evening, found this climb particularly difficult. They made their way up, panting and in pain, holding onto the walls. Of course, even in the wealthiest houses, there was no elevator for the servants. The small windows of these cells offered a view only of the gray sky, smoking chimneys, or the roofs of neighboring houses. It was impossible to see the street and the life of the city because of the height of the windows. This further emphasized the servants' complete detachment from the real world. They lived physically above everyone else in the house, but at the same time were below everyone else in terms of social status. They could only see the world through the narrow loopholes of their almost prison-like cells. This created the feeling of living in a tower cut off from the ground. Sanitary conditions in the attic also left much to be desired and were far from hygienic standards. There were no amenities, chamber pots were used, linen was changed infrequently, and there was no question of proper hot baths. In such crowded and unsanitary conditions, any infection spread instantly. But the price for this relative comfort and safety was exorbitantly high. The price was the complete loss of personal freedom, individuality, and the right to dispose of one's own time. People voluntarily gave themselves into slavery for a piece of bread and a corner to sleep in. The attic was a place of secret dreams and bitter nighttime tears, safely hidden from prying eyes. Only here, after taking off their uniforms, could the servants remove their mask of polite obedience. For a short time, they became ordinary living people again, with their fears, hopes, and pain. But even here in the darkness, the walls of the house continued to oppress them with their geometry of subjugation. The very architecture of the building reminded them that they were just cogs in the huge mechanism of someone else's luxurious life. Victorian comfort rested on two pillars, warmth and cleanliness, both of which required titanic efforts hidden from view. Fireplaces, which we consider a symbol of comfort, were a real nightmare for the servants. In a large house, there could be dozens of them, and each one had to be cleaned, filled with coal, and lit before the owners woke up. This meant that the fireplace maid had to get up before dawn, around 5 in the morning. She walked through cold corridors with heavy buckets of coal and tools, making her way to the living rooms and bedrooms while no one was there. Her work was dirty, soot and ash ate into her skin and clothes, so she had to get everything done and disappear without leaving a speck of dust on the carpets. Dust was her number one enemy. Heavy curtains, carpets, upholstered furniture, and many knickknacks, fashionable at the time, were excellent dust collectors. The fight against dust was done by hand, with brushes, rags, and beaters. There were no vacuum cleaners yet, and cleaning a carpet meant taking it outside and beating it for a long time, or crawling on the floor, collecting dirt with damp tea leaves. Lighting also required constant work. Gas lamps smoked, leaving a greasy film on the ceilings and walls that had to be washed off regularly. Oil lamps had to be refilled and cleaned every day. Candles dripped, and wax drops had to be scraped off the furniture and parquet flooring. Light was expensive not only in money, but also in man-hours. Hot water did not flow from the tap at will. In order for a lady to take a bath, maids had to carry dozens of jugs of hot water from the kitchen in the basement to the second or third floor. This was hundreds of kilograms of cargo carried by hand up the stairs every day. After the bath, the water had to be scooped out and carried back. Laundry was another circle of hell. Without washing machines, it was a process that took several days. Soaking, boiling in huge vats, rubbing on boards, wringing through rollers, and drying. The laundry was starched and ironed with heavy cast iron irons heated on the stove. A mistake in temperature could ruin expensive fabric forever. Polishing furniture and silverware was a never-ending process. The copper door handles, silver cutlery, mahogany tables, everything had to shine. Servants rubbed their fingers raw, polishing surfaces with special pastes and cloths. The shine of the house was literally a reflection of the labor put into it. All this work had to be done in absolute silence. Servants were forbidden to clatter buckets or bang brushes when the owners were at home. They learned to move like ghosts, performing heavy physical work with the grace of ballerinas. Technical progress gradually made this work easier. Running water, electricity, and central heating appeared. But in the classic Victorian era, the house was an insatiable monster, devouring human strength in order to maintain its status. The comfort of some was built on the exhaustion of others. The warmth of the fireplace was only pleasant because someone else carried coal for it and raked out the ashes. This invisible price of comfort was built into the very structure of everyday life. The Victorian mansion was not just a dwelling, but a stone embodiment of social order. Every brick, every corridor, and every staircase was designed to maintain hierarchy and discipline. Architecture worked better than any overseer, physically directing people and restricting their freedom. The division of space into master and servant areas was fundamental. It taught people from childhood to understand their place in the world. The children of servants entering into service quickly learned the geography of the house, where some areas were open to them and others were forbidden, like sacred ground. This formed a psychology of submission at the level of reflexes. Gender segregation built into the layout of the servants' bedrooms prevented undesirable relationships and maintained the moral image of the house. Architecture took on the function of a morality police, creating physical barriers between men and women. Locks, doors, and separate staircases were the guardians of Victorian morality. A surveillance system was also built into the house. The housekeeper's room was often located so that it overlooked corridors and entrances, allowing her to monitor the movements of the staff. Glazed upper parts of doors in service rooms prevented servants from being alone or idling unnoticed. Even the height of the ceilings worked to reinforce the hierarchy. The transition from spacious rooms with high ceilings to low-service corridors was psychologically oppressive, causing people to involuntarily stoop and feel smaller and insignificant. The space manipulated people's self-perception. The house was a model of the ideal society according to the Victorians. The head, the master, rules. The hands, the servant's work, and all parts of the body are in their places without mixing. Chaos and unpredictability were banished with the help of walls and partitions. Order was the highest virtue, and architecture was its main tool. However, this system was fragile. It required enormous resources and constant effort. With the beginning of the 20th century and changes in society, the emergence of new technologies and workers' rights, this architectural tyranny began to crumble. Servants left for factories and huge houses became too expensive to maintain. The Victorian house is a lesson in how the environment shapes consciousness. It shows that walls can speak, command, and forbid, and if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of that silent command in the old corridors. Know your place. This legacy makes us think about how modern architecture affects us. Are we free in our homes and offices? Or does space still dictate the rules of the game? We have walked with you through the secret passages of a Victorian mansion, peeked behind a green door, and descended into dark basements. This tour has shown us that the luxury of the past came at a hidden price, expressed in hard labor and harsh social division. The architecture of these houses was both ingenious and ruthless, creating the illusion of an easy life at the expense of an invisible army of people. Hidden staircases, tunnels, and mechanisms were not just technical solutions, but instruments of power and control. By understanding the structure of these houses, we can better understand the era itself and the people who lived in it. What modern hidden spaces or technologies do you think shape our lives as much as these staircases influence the lives of Victorians? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, where we could explore the hidden side of familiar things. And, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into history.